Hello, everyone. Juxtaposition here. This will be part two of Anatomy of a Conspiracy, where again, if you're talking about Charlie Manson and Susan Atkins, then you're not talking about the M7 bayonet soldiers that came onto CIA-controlled properties in Benedict Canyon, and then 33 hours later in Silver Lake, which is also a CIA-controlled neighborhood on Waverly Drive. Soldiers came on the property at 3301 Waverly Drive, which is the home of Lino LaBianca's mother, Corina LaBianca. They were just temporarily staying there until they could close their horse farm in North San Diego County in the town of Vista, which is approximately 2 hours south. All right, so again, if you're talking about Sam Bankman-Fried, or Freed, soon to be Fried, and Caroline Ellison, then you're not talking about Don Valentine, you're not talking about Doug Leone, who created FTX and created the CIA psych ops known as crypto scandal. Get back on the yellow brick road. See, those are diversions. The scapegoat is always the diversion. So to conceal the conspiracy, because there is a conspiracy and they want the root of the conspiracy and the players in it to be hidden from view. So no other conspiracy is better hidden than the porn industry of Hollywood, because Hollywood is dominantly in the pornography business. They're in the social engineering business, they're in the addiction business, they're in the anchor bias business, and that of course is CIA 101. So if you want to follow MK Ultra and understand drugs and electroshock treatment, you got to really understand pornography, because CBS and Columbia Broadcasting System has been in the porn industry since the day they were founded. And they even had a company called Manson International. That predated Charlie Manson, who, by the way, that's not Charlie Manson's real name. His biological father is named Scott. And his child bride of a mother who was only 15 years old when she had Charlie was unmarried. So she later married a gentleman by the name of Manson, and then that somehow is attributed to Charlie, but he was never really raised in a normal functioning family. He was always under the control of the clandestine services through orphanages. So I think Manson is really the pornography name for CBS, the Masonic evil eye. Anyway, I want to weave together some relationships that you may not be aware of. We know that with the World Trade Center, that was a direct energy weapon system. Systems, plural. It's more than one way to blow up a building, because they didn't just blow up the buildings. They melted them. They evaporated the concrete and the steel and the glass and the photocopy machines. They pulverized 99% of that building material, which is over 4 times more material than would be in the Empire State Building, which had a B-25 bomber crash into it, killing the 3 crewmen. That was back in July in the year 1945. Just after World War II, we had an Army bomber crash into the Empire State Building on the 78th and the 79th floor, and it killed 11 office workers working on those 2 floors. And there was a little tiny fire that was put out very quickly, burned out. No one put it out. It just went out on its own. And they opened the building up the next day for business. So the idea of airplanes crashing into buildings in Manhattan, New York is not a new idea. It happened in 1945 with the Empire State Building. And the World Trade Center has 4 to 5 times more concrete involved with their construction, a superior design, and they melted like a bunny rabbit coming out of a hat, no problemo. So if you talk about fires and airplanes, then you're not talking about Department of Energy and the clandestine services and the banks who sponsor the destruction of the World Trade Center. You're not talking about who did it. You're talking about what didn't do it. Fires didn't do it. Airplanes didn't do it. A guy in a cave in Afghanistan who works for the CIA, he didn't do it. But other people that work for the clandestine services did do it, and that would include our weapons laboratories. All right, so if you talk about Jose Menendez's two sons, Lyle, who's a student at Princeton University. I said Princeton University. Lyle, the older brother. And you're talking about Eric, who was age 18 when his parents were both shotgunned to death, 13 blasts of shotguns, plural. If you're talking about those two 18 and 21-year-old boys killing their parents, then you're not talking about the clandestine services murdering the parents. And if you talk about that they're Beverly Hills brats, having never attended Beverly Hills High School, having only attended Calabasas High School in the case of Eric, he went to Calabasas High School. That's up where Peter Grossman lives, next door to Lori Loughlin, who paid $500,000 of bribes to University of Southern California, USC, so that she could get her daughters into university, right? And doctor SAT, scholastic aptitude tests, right? Next door neighbors to Peter Grossman and Rebecca. We're going to talk about Rebecca Grossman and Peter in a second. That's where Ann Heche was taken to the Burn Center in West Hills, which is Canoga Park, which is the center of pornography, where Lori Loughlin lives in a gated community. That's porn epicenter. That's where Jose Menendez was building a 12-acre home, 9,000 square foot home in Hidden Hills, Calabasas, because he worked 5 minutes away in Canoga Park. Porn! Because Jose Menendez was in the porn business. He'd been in the porn business for 9 years. He'd been since he'd worked for RCA as a chief operating officer. He was in charge of pornography and music. That's what introduced him into San Fernando Valley, and that's how he knew Hidden Hills, West Hills, Canoga Park, Woodland Hills, Westlake Village, Van Nuys, and Encino, where Ellen DeGeneres' disc jockey was just murdered last week. In San Fernando Valley, in Encino, where Phil Hartman was murdered, right off Ventura Boulevard, which is very close to where Lori Ann Loughlin resides with her second husband. What's his name? It's hard to keep track of all these Hollywood relationships. Massimo Giannelli. Before that, she was married to Michael Burns from New Jersey. Michael Burns, right, who came out west. California is the place you want to be. And he's working for Prudential Securities. And he's working with Shearson Lehman, kind of the same place that Jamie Dimon was working. He's coming out of a finance background, Michael Burns, and he gets involved with the financing of Hollywood. And eventually he becomes the vice chairman of Lionsgate, which owns the porn industry, where the companies that Jose Menendez was the chief executive officer for was Live Entertainment, Artisan Pictures, Caballero Home Video, International Video Entertainment, and a bunch of others. That's Jose Menendez's business. Lionsgate now owns the businesses that Jose Menendez was the CEO and chairman of the board. Now, Lori Ann Loughlin's ex-husband, he's the chairman of the board of all that porn. Yeah. So, Michael Burns, Lori Ann Loughlin's first husband, he has the same background as Jose Menendez, minus the Havana, Cuba. Jose Menendez and Frank Finorina and Jose Pertamo, who went on to murder John Lennon at the Dakota, they all came out of Havana, Cuba. They all knew General Batista, and they all knew Fidel Castro, who was a graduate of the University of Havana. So they're all one big happy CIA family. CIA. All of them. Jose Menendez, CIA, all the way. And then they give him an athletic scholarship when he really wasn't very athletic, and at University of Illinois, Carbondale, which he does not complete. And then he meets his new wife, Kitty, not a real name, and they move to Queens, New York. He attends Queens College, graduates there, gets a CPA license, goes to work as a controller for an international intermodal transportation container business in Cicero, Illinois, near Chicago. And then he becomes the president, CEO of a container company, which is used to transport drugs. And then he goes over to New Jersey and gets to be a chief operating officer for RCA Entertainment, which includes pornography and music. And they send him on out to Hollywood. And that's when he gets introduced to people like Mario Kassar, Andrew Vajna, not his real name is András, Weidmann, a Jewish gentleman from Istanbul, Turkey, friend of Oliver Silverstein Stone, business partner of Oliver Silverstein Stone. They produced the film The Doors, about Jim Morrison, whose father is George Morrison, who created the Vietnam War through the Bay of Tonkin incident. You'll notice that didn't get covered really well with Oliver Stone's film The Doors, right? He's a social engineer, and part of being a social engineer, Oliver Stone, is to conceal the truth, is to conceal history. Now, Oliver Stone likes to say he's a dramaticist, that he likes to portray things in an exciting way. And he does. There's no question about that. But in doing so, by ignoring where Jim Morrison really came from and the truth about his father, who was a rear admiral in the United States Navy intelligence, stationed in the Bay of Tonkin and in charge of all the Navy ships in the Bay of Tonkin, and they created a fake incident that never happened in real life because there is no North Vietnam Army and there is no North Vietnam Navy. They have some plywood reconnaissance boats, and you're not going to attack a Navy destroyer with a plywood El Toro. But that's what they did, and that's not covered in the movie The Doors, which was distributed by TriStar Pictures. Now, when I say TriStar, for all you money laundering experts, you know I mean Sony Pictures. And when I say MGM, I mean Sony. Although today when I say Sony, I mean Amazon. Because Amazon owns Sony, and Sony owns MGM, and they own TriStar, and they own Oliver Stone's distribution. So whenever you hear stupid poppycock things coming out of Neil Young's mouth, like he's going to pull his music off Spotify when he doesn't own any music because Warner Brothers owns his music, then you know it's just concealment of the truth. That's what they do. They call things what they're not. So live entertainment was really Caballero home video, owned and created by Noel Bloom, a lifelong career pornographer, as was his father before him. So you're really talking about the Noel Bloom porn business, which became live entertainment, which is now known as Artisan Pictures or Artisan Studios, and now part of Lionsgate Entertainment, which is Lori Ann Loughlin's ex-husband. Now, it's hard to defend Lori Loughlin because her first husband is in the porn business, okay? And they lived in Hidden Hills, which is in the center of the porn business. So it's very difficult to say that Lori Ann doesn't know about the pornography business. She's living in the center of the porn zip code. So this is where Charlie Manson was given a 5-acre property in Canoga Park. This is how they try to conceal the fact that people like Jose Menendez and Lori Loughlin and Peter Grossman and his wife Rebecca Grossman of the Grossman Burn Center, which is really a cosmetic surgery center because there are 0 to hardly any burn accidents that ever happen. And you can include the Anne Heche car crash that never happened in real life. Anyway, those 4 people are all living in Calabasas, Hidden Hills, but it's Canoga Park. It's Canoga. That's what they used to call Canoga Park. They renamed it so once people realized that Canoga Park was where most of the porn studios were, they had to, on the perimeter of it, call it something that it's not. That's the Spahn Ranch, people. That's where Frank Sinatra lived. That's where George Spahn of the George Spahn Ranch was. The Iverson Ranch was. The CBS Studios was. That's where Doris Day's son, Terry Melcher, did some work there. Where Craig Jacobson did some work there. But he didn't live there, and neither did Charlie Manson. Charlie Manson lived in Canoga Park, 4.5 miles southeast of the Spahn Ranch, and about 1.5 miles from where Lori Ann Loughlin lives. I mean, Charlie Manson was living within 2 miles of her. And that was where Jose Menendez was building a home. When he was murdered on 722 North Elm Drive, Beverly Hills, 90210, where he didn't live. He was staying there in much of the same way that Lino LaBianca was staying in the home that he was killed, in much of the same way that Sharon Tate and Abigail Folger were staying overnight in a home they didn't live in. That's a military-industrial house. Doesn't belong to them. Before Jose Menendez lived at 722 North Elm, Elton John lived there. And before him, before Elton John lived there, Michael Jackson lived there. So it's not really a house that belongs to Jose Menendez. And Sharon Tate never owned that home, and her clothes weren't in the closet. And before her, Jane Fonda lived there, and Henry Fonda lived there for a short time. And Cary Grant stayed overnight there a couple of times, along with Diane Cannon. Okay? I'll tell you who didn't. Sharon Tate. Roman Polanski. Never. Because he's the fake acting husband. He's not a real husband. He's a fake husband. All right, so Caracol Pictures was the CIA's reformation, reconstruction. It's a CIA name, Carolco. It came from a Panamanian CIA company. Then they brought it to San Fernando Valley, which is Hollywood. Hollywood just along the Ventura Highway from Burbank and Studio City, where William Shatner's wife got drowned in the bottom of a swimming pool. Just a few miles, about 6 to 8 miles to the west of that location, you'll have the Noam Bloom Pornography Center, and he has an office in Canoga Park, and that is where Jose Menendez had an office. Wherever Noam Bloom was, that's where Jose Menendez was. He also had an office in Woodland Hills, in Van Nuys, and in Canoga Park. That's why he wanted to live in Calabasas. He was renting in Calabasas and building a home in Hidden Hills, which is just a gated community of Calabasas. He was not going to live in Beverly Hills. That's 25 minutes the wrong direction with a lot of traffic. So thank you, Dominic Dunn and Karen Lamb, ex-wife of Robert Lamb of the Chicago Transit Authority, for your Liar Liar, Pants on Fire, Vogue, or Vanity Fair and Mendacity television fake documentaries to get everybody off the track that Jose Menendez was CIA operative, and he worked in the container business. He worked for RCA in the entertainment business. Okay? He had a finance background, and then he went into the pornography business. Okay? And that is exactly what has happened to Lori Ann Loughlin's first husband, whose name is Michael Burns, because he came from a finance background, working for the same company that Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of Chase Manhattan. And then Michael Burns is now the vice chairman of Lionsgate Entertainment, which has taken over all the Jose Menendez porn operations, which belonged to András Weidmann and Mario Kassar. And just so you have an inkling of what that's worth, when Jose Menendez went to work for András Weidmann and Mario Kassar, they took out a $15 million life insurance policies, 2 policies totaling $15 million on the life of Jose Menendez. And Jose Menendez only worked for them for 4 years. He worked for them for 1986, 87, 88, and he was murdered. He was murdered by the clandestine services on August 20th, 1989. So he didn't even work a full 4 years. And there's $15 million of life insurance. 2 months after Jose Menendez is murdered, 2 months after that, October, November, András Weidmann pretends to sell his interest to Mario Kassar for $100 million. That's 50%. That means that Carolco Pictures spelled Carolco. CIA Carolco Pictures are worth $200 million. Only two people that own it. In 1989. That means it's worth over $1 billion today. And they don't make a product. They broker porn. Other people make the movies. Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Michael Douglas, Oliver Stone, The Doors. Other people are producing the movies. Carolco is just the broker. They get an executive producer fee, along with Ronnie Howard, who's also on board. You know, he gets paid too. Ronnie Howard has a Jewish partner, and he participates with Noel Bloom and András Weidmann. Yes, they all do. It's one big happy money laundering facility where you sell other people's products. That's how the record business works. They write the music with professional songwriters. Then they get, you know, young, naive kids to pretend to be the artists. Then they put the wardrobe on them. And then, you know, the studios like CBS, Columbia, Sony, which is now Amazon, Warner Brothers, they make all the money. CBS, RCA, Warner Brothers, Amazon, they make all the money. And, you know, 1% goes to the artists who really aren't deserving of it. You know, you think Paul McCartney wrote all of his own songs? I don't think so. Not with the amazing amount of interviews and promotional work that he had to do. He had a lot of help. And their wardrobe was completely put together. They didn't pick their wardrobe and their haircuts. All right, so what I'm trying to tell you is that Lori Allen Loughlin is engaged in a scandal that emanated from March 19, 2019, when she entered into a plea agreement for paying $500,000 of bribes to get her daughters into USC and manipulate their SAT scores unlawfully. But of course, this is a put together thing because it wasn't just Lori by herself. It's lots of people in Hollywood do this kind of thing. And a lot of them don't get caught. So it doesn't really make any difference. Let's not forget that George Lucas attended USC, right? And he went on to do THX 1138, Star Wars, and then is the land trust of 4,700 acres of Lucas Skywalker Ranch in Marin County, which is CI Spooksville, USA. And there's no way he could afford to get 4,700 acres in Marin County. No way. But the clandestine services can make that happen, and then they appoint him as the land trust beneficiary of it. Doesn't really make any difference. It doesn't really produce any money. It's just a beautiful, spectacular property that you can't use. You can't hike on that property unless you know somebody. Again, security cameras everywhere. All right, so what I want to tell you is it's been a busy 2022. We had Bob Saget. That kicked the year off. Bob Saget was the star of Full House, and he was murdered by a blunt force object to his head at a Ritz-Carlton hotel in Orlando, Florida on January 9th, 2022. Bob Saget, murdered. He's a Jewish fellow from back east, I believe Pennsylvania. Anyway, so he was murdered in a Ritz-Carlton hotel. He had performed 60 miles away on the beach at a comedy club. So he must have spent an hour, 20-minute drive back to the Ritz-Carlton and got conked on the head pretty quickly after he checked into his room at a Ritz-Carlton expensive hotel. That is exactly how William Holden, the best man of Ronald Reagan and Nancy Davis at their wedding at the little church, William Holden was hit in the head with a blunt force object, and there's never found a murder weapon in that case, and we never found the murder weapon with Bob Saget. But he was associated with Full House. The producer of Full House lives in the Sharon Tate murder scene. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? That the producer of the television show, Jeff Franklin, lives at the scene where Abigail Folger and Sharon Tate were stabbed by soldiers with M7 NATO bayonets, right? And that's the person who's occupying that property is Jeff Franklin, who produced Lori Loughlin and Bob Saget in Full House. And don't forget, Timothy Leary just lived down the ice plant. Timothy Leary where Oliver Silverstein Stone visited him on St. Patrick's Day, 1996. Oliver Stone, there he is, giving a get well card to Timothy Leary, the LSD CIA maven, 30 seconds away from where Abigail Folger bled out on the lawn. There's Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone, Oliver Silverstein, Timothy Leary, Jeff Franklin, living in houses where Sharon Tate was killed. Okay? And who's living at 722 North Elm where Jose Menendez was killed? Well, William Link from Colombo, the television producer of Colombo, moved into the home where Kitty and Jose Menendez were shotgun blasted 13 times to their death. Would you want to live in that home if you were a big successful Hollywood producer? Would you want to live at Sharon Tate's murder site if you were a Hollywood producer? Well, Jeff Franklin does, and William Link does, and Timothy Leary did, till he died, May 30th, 1996, and Oliver Stone went over there to visit. And Lori Loughlin lives in the pornography center in Hidden Hills, and her next door neighbor is Rebecca Grossman, who's married to Peter Grossman, who inherited his cosmetic surgery business in Canoga Park, porn, from his father, Richard Grossman. It's another Jewish gentleman. And anyway, Rebecca was drinking at a Mexican restaurant back in March 19th, 2019. No, scratch that. That's when Lori Loughlin got in trouble with her USC bribes. In the case of Rebecca Grossman, she has a Mercedes-Benz SUV on September 20th, 2020, 2 years ago. 2 years ago. She's drinking with a former Major League Baseball pitcher who's also a neighbor of hers in Calabasas, Hidden Hills. You might have heard of him. Scott Erickson. He played for the Los Angeles Dodgers and the New York Yankees. He was a pitcher. Anyway, he's drinking with a married woman, Rebecca Grossman, at a Mexican restaurant in Westlake Village, which is 13 miles away, 13 miles west of Hidden Hills, pornography center of the world, where Lori Ann Loughlin lives and Scott Erickson lives. Anyway, they're drinking. They get in their cars and they race. They race their cars in a 45-mile-an-hour speed area in Westlake Village, whereupon Rebecca runs over two little children, two little boys, killing both of them. One of the boys stayed on the trunk of her car for about an eighth of a mile before she hit the brakes and the body fell off. And she went home. It's a hit and run. And she's probably drunk or impaired, right? When the sheriff's department finally got over to her, they claimed that she was impaired. But again, I don't have the DUI test. I don't think they tested her right away. She evaded the authorities. Anyway, you're looking at a $15 million lawsuit on this. There's two little boys, ages 8 and 10, that are dead. And Rebecca Grossman killed them. What a coincidence that it would be her husband, Peter, whose burn unit would be available for Ann Heche on August 5th of this year, 2022, when Peter Grossman is looking at a $15 to $20 million lawsuit that he's going to lose because his drunk wife, Rebecca, ran over two boys in the crosswalk, in the zebra crosswalk, near Westlake Village. There's a lake. There's the lake, Westlake, and she mowed them down, and estimated speed is 70 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour limit. And these kids are in the crosswalk, and she killed them while they're walking in the painted white zebra striped crosswalk. So it's not easy to defend yourself from this crime, people. It's a pretty slam dunk case. Anyway, what I'm trying to tell you is Peter Grossman is going to do whatever he's told, because the Ann Heche episode in Culver City, which they renamed Mar Vista, because they don't want you to know this is where Ronald Reagan used to work, this is where Sony Pictures is, Amazon is, MGM Studios is. They don't want you to know that, so they call it Mar Vista when it's Culver City. It's 4 miles away from where Ronald Reagan made war propaganda films. It's where Bob Crane made Hogan's Heroes episodes. That's where the Ann Heche fake car crash that never happened. So, of course, if you have a fake fiery car crash with a fake burn victim, you take him to the Peter Grossman Burn Center because he'll produce an invoice, no questions asked, right? Because he's going to get some help in this lawsuit. Because, look, it's been over 2 years now and Rebecca hasn't signed her plea agreement and they haven't paid any settlement. And I think that the Class Neston Services is going to help the Grossmans solve this major $20 million problem. You know, they live in a home with 12 bathrooms and at least 6 bedrooms in like a 9,000 square foot home in Hidden Hills. So porn pays. Porn pays. I'm not saying that she's in porn, but she's living in the porn center of the world. Hidden Hills. Gated community celebrating porn. All right. That's it for now. I just wanted to bring those relationships to mind. Jose Menendez, you were never told that he was in the porn business. You were never told that Lori Loughlin's first husband took over Jose Menendez's porn business, which belongs to Noam Bloom originally, and András Weidmann, who's a partner with Oliver Stone, and Mario Kassar, who's a partner with Oliver Silverstein Stone, and that Oliver Stone is partners with men that produce porn, and that Oliver Stone goes over and spends time with CIA, LSD, Timothy Leary at the Sharon Tate murder scene, and that the Sharon Tate murder scene is occupied by the producer of Full House, who employed Bob Saget, who was murdered this year, who employed Lori Loughlin, who was serving her federal prison sentence this year, and he lives at the Sharon Tate murder scene. And Jose Menendez's murder scene is occupied by William Link of the Columbo detective series, my favorite detective series. So you see, my favorite television show is CIA controlled, and the producer of that show is CIA controlled. He's living in the scene where Kitty and Jose Menendez were blasted with shotguns. That's pretty creepy, people. But everything about Hollywood is creepy. You make a deal with the devil. If you're Oliver Stone and you do what you're told, you go over to 10106 Sunbrook Drive and you go say hello to Timothy Leary if I tell you to do that. So Sean Stone, if you're listening, that's a cult ritual. You are always hounding me about cult rituals. Well, ask your father. He knows all about it, okay? Look, Jeffrey Franklin knows about cult rituals. Oliver Stone knows about cult rituals. Art Linkletter understands cult rituals. They murdered 3 of his children, okay? Ronald Reagan knows about cult rituals. They murdered his best man, William Holden, right? So pornography or G-rated, R-rated, makes no difference. It's the same deal with the devil. It's what Sharon Stone had to do a film called The Eye of the Devil for MGM, which is now Amazon, a.k.a. TriStar Pictures, Sony. Have a great day. Hit the like and subscribe. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.